Videos you're about to see are a collection of videos that I've already done. Now, I've put these into categories. So in other words, out of the, at the moment, 900 odd videos I've done, I cover many different subjects from spirits, Bigfoots, aliens, ancient aliens, etc. So the video you're about to watch is a collection of just one subject. In other words, Anunnaki, pyramids, Egypt, whatever it is that you're just about to watch. Now, you can watch them all on YouTube free of charge, no problem at all. They're in sets of 5, as you see here, or they're actually in sets of 50, so you can actually watch them in one whole go, right from video number 1. But you can also go to my website and find the links and podcasts, etc. there. And the website address is ourtruehistory.co.uk, and you can again find the videos straight through there. And there's some special ones there which are also on YouTube. But if you're after something that's not on YouTube or on my website, I do have a Patreon page called Our True History, and it's at the moment it's got 76 other videos. Now, some of these are actually proper documentaries that I make. So there's a documentary called Everything You Need to Know About Spirits. There's a documentary called Everything You Need to Know About Mermaids. The spirit one is 3 hours long, fully edited properly, etc. So if you are interested in more of my kind of projects, or what do I call them, videos, feel free to go to my Patreon page. And also ones that are not categorized on YouTube, even though they're free on YouTube, but the ones that are not categorized, if you click here, you'll see category videos on my Patreon page, and it's got other ones, so it just calls part videos. So basically it's the same as what you're watching now, but may not be on YouTube. I've put the category ones on Patreon, but again, you can watch them all in order on YouTube or my website free of charge. But Patreon, unfortunately, you have to pay. But that's why I sit and make very long documentaries about everything you need to know, etc. So hopefully I'll see you there. Anyway, enough of me waffling. Enjoy this whatever it is you're watching, because I'm using the same intro for all the videos. Thank you. I just briefly touched on the 10 Commandments in the last video, which are supposedly put inside the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I believe the Ark of the Covenant was a power source or a weapon, or both. And the reason why I believe that is because when you read up on it, whoever was holding the Ark would absolutely annihilate the enemy, you know, armies of enemies. And the certain people could only carry the Ark of the Covenant. And these were high priests, and on reading upon it, there's some sort of device that they had on their chests which allowed them to communicate to God. So I'm thinking obviously it's some sort of radio communication of some sort. But what's interesting is the size of the covenant is in cubits, is exactly the same size as the what they called the tomb in the Great Pyramid, the King's Chamber. But it wasn't a tomb, because no one was ever buried in a. So I'm just carrying on from where I was talking about the Anunnaki fighting themselves, and they did have a massive explosion. Now, in the Bible, I don't normally talk about the Bible, but the reason why I'm talking about the Bible now is because the Book of Enoch did end at some point, and where the Bible obviously was a retelling of the Book of Enoch, it carried on and was added to. So the Bible has got actually extra things in there that the Book of Enoch doesn't. And one of the bits I'm talking about here is where there's an explosion, a mass destruction, and the flesh will rot from the people, and their eyes will rot in their sockets, etc. So if you look at what a nuclear explosion causes, it causes a very similar sort of radiation, burns, etc., etc. And to have an explosion, you would find in sand areas. So Western Egypt, which is roughly where they had the explosion, there is green glass, which is caused by an explosion. So we're just sort of summing up that the Anunnaki arrived at Mesopotamia, which is sort of Middle East now. They did travel to Africa to create mines, and they also created Adam and Eve there. But they also travelled a lot further adrift. But Mesopotamia is the main area where they had actually fights over different territories. The Anunnaki did, and one such fight resulted in a nuclear explosion, where you ended up with green glass, which is only achieved when you have some sort of nuclear explosion. Now in the Bible it talks about what happened to people when this happened. So obviously we now know it's a nuclear explosion, but they said things like, you know, the skin was falling off and the flesh would rot from their eyes. So if you look at what actually does happen, you know, to a person with a nuclear explosion, the same sort of effects happen with radiation and skin burns. Okay, so we're going to slightly move over from Mesopotamia to Egypt. And first thing you need to do is unlearn everything that you think you know about Egypt, because what you are told is, for example, that the Great Pyramid is 4,500 years old, and that's because there was a cartouche inside the pyramid and it was graffiti, and it basically said that it belongs to Khufu, so that makes it dated to around 4,500. Anyway, the last couple of years that cartouche has been proven to be fake, and what happened was two prominent historians and archaeologists were fighting each other in trying to get recognition, and the one of them, I can't remember his name, one of them went into this Great Pyramid, went right up to the top and faked this cartouche so that he could then claim that he now knows who created the pyramid, and so he got the recognition. However, the date of that is completely wrong, and I'll explain in the next video. So in the last video I just said that the dates are fake because of the people believing that it's the Khufu's pyramid. So we know that it's fake, the dates, because the weathering. Now lots of reputable scientists have done weathering on the Sphinx, etc. Obviously that's slightly harder when you had the pyramids had an outer coating, and that's all gone now. But so on the Sphinx, they date it back to about 10 to 12,000 years. Now, bearing in mind, mainstream say 5,000, but 10 to 12,000, we should have been hunter-gatherers. We shouldn't be building anything. So they obviously don't want us to know our true history, and if you've watched the other videos, you know why. Now, bear in mind that the pyramids are not tombs. Everyone says they're a tomb. They're not. No one was ever buried in a pyramid. So please get that out of your head. Start unlearning what they've taught you. Pyramids are something totally different, and I'll explain later on. So if we look at Egypt there, we can see Jerusalem and Israel, and we all know who was born around that area there. And so this is all to do with Mesopotamia and the Anunnaki land in there. So you can see they sort of spread out. Now Egypt has a connection with the Anunnaki, and that's because look at Queen Nefertiti's long elongated skull. Yes, she did have one. Her husband, wait for it, Akhenaten, who was also shown there, had an elongated skull. Difficult to show on these pictures, but yes, he did. And Tutankhamun recently, in a BBC documentary, done a head scan of their child, Tutankhamun. Now people could say, oh well, that's because they were inbred and whatever else, but if you go back to everything that I've already said about the elongated skulls from Anunnakis, you can see why the rulers, and only the rulers, had the elongated skulls. There is one thing I'm actually unclear on, and that's how the Sumerian or the Anunnaki's writing, which is what you can see on the screen at the moment, how that ended up changing to the hieroglyphics in Egypt. Now, there was a huge difference in time, you know, we're talking tens of thousands of years. So did the Anunnaki perfect their writing into the hieroglyphics, or was it a faction that split off from the Anunnaki that started to create their own language separate? Now, there is the story of Babel, the Tower of Babel, but that, I believe, came a lot later. When humans, or Homo sapiens travelled a lot further around the globe. So I'm unsure on that. If anyone's got any answers to why the Anunnaki's writing changed over tens of thousands of years, unless that's natural. I'm just going to show you why you can't trust mainstream. So they're saying that Khufu's pyramid was built in 20 years. Now, that's by pulling it up like that. But there was over 2.3 million stones, which means you have to have placed one every 2.5 minutes, which is pretty darn impressive. But that's not including, over the 20 years, that the Nile floods up to the pyramid, or did back then anyway. So they would have had to have stopped, and that means they're also working through the night as well, just to get the 2.5 minutes. So straight away that blows them out of the water. Now, the problem with doing it this way is the quarry was actually less than a mile away. So you would have had to have people literally right behind this lot, right here, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one, for a mile long. But that wouldn't have worked. You would have had to have zigzagged the slopes to get it to even close to that, because obviously it was a mile. So just carrying on as to why the mainstream lied to us. So if I can just read you from an excellent book. There are some marks on a few stones that appear to be saw marks, so the conclusion is that the copper saws created these marks. However, the amount of copper saws required to cut 2.3 million stone blocks would be a huge amount. It would be in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. Yet there was only a mere handful found, which might suggest that saws were used but not used for the whole process. The saws didn't have teeth like modern saws. Instead, it suggested that it was sand that was used with the copper to rub against the stone to cut it. That's not going to happen with cutting limestone 2.3 million blocks in 20 years. You would have needed a humongous workforce, plus the amount of logs you would have needed to have rolled the... It's just totally impossible. So there's people out there that say that the pyramids match or point to Orion because of the shape of the two pyramids plus the smaller one slightly off center of them. Now they say that because there's these shafts that come out of the pyramid and they point up to the sky, but people have reversed the dating back to make it fit with where Orion was. So in other words, now they wouldn't be pointing at Orion, but 2,500 years ago it would be. So they're saying, oh well, that's another reason why it's real, or 10,000 years. The problem with all of that is, I'm not saying that they're not anything to do with Orion, but National Geographic did a video and they put a camera that goes up there on a remote vehicle, and then they found that it doesn't actually go there, it turns and it goes up that way. So, and same with that. So that kind of negates the shaft. So we're up to what is a pyramid made for if it's not a tomb. I believe pyramids do different things, and this is a great pyramid we're looking at here. And if you remember the video I did on Tesla, which said about the free wireless power that he created, and then you think that the Great Pyramid is smack bang on a ley line, which the energy of the earth creates a power that goes upwards. The answer is, I'm just using someone's book here, is the pyramid, or the Great Pyramid, is a power plant. Now there's so much documentation out there as to why. I can't actually go into all of that within a minute, but basically it creates a power that's sent out over a vast distance, and it's picked up using these. Now obviously we're unsure exactly what the power's used for. Did they just use it for simple lights, or did they use it for huge devices that they took back with them when they... So I'm sure you're aware that there's more than pyramids than just in Egypt. But there's also hidden pyramids. So for example, there's one here in Bosnia. There's a hidden one in China, and these are hidden simply because they're covered over with trees and stuff from the thousands of years. However, in China, no one else is allowed to go near it except for the locals. Begs the question why, what's inside there. So they're generally all over the place. There's even reports that there's one in Wales in the UK. And road workers were digging up the road and came across the capstone, started digging down and realised it was a massive pyramid, and their bosses basically told them to cover over it, and now there's a roundabout there. But there's also pyramids in Antarctica. Now that's a huge deal, because there's also speculation that there's military down there actually under the ice in cities. I know it sounds like a movie, but that's where, and I'll talk about that later. So I'm not saying that it was just the Anunnaki that built the pyramids. They used the humans that they had already created to help them. Now there's not one bit of evidence, not one bit to say how they built the pyramids. And that's why obviously people assume that it was slopes and whatnot. The Anunnaki wanted to keep their secrets secret, and that's why you have things like the Freemasons and Knights Templars and the Builders, because they kept the knowledge and didn't want people to have it anyway. So if you look at Egypt statues, just as they did with Anunnakis, they built statues to honour themselves. But the quality, just as with building a pyramid, look at the quality of that. That is perfectly symmetrical. Something that we would find hard to do today, certainly by hand. So it begs the question, what kind of tools did they use? Yes, this was a pyramid and still is a pyramid. It's a slightly destroyed and abandoned one. But the army, when they first found this pyramid, which is on top of a very large hill, which made it really difficult to build, I'm sure, the army stopped people from going in. The army secured the area and was there for a very, very long time to make sure that people like me and you didn't go and find the secrets. What secrets? Such as the Eye of Horus. You may have heard of it. Now, this is classed as an all-seeing eye, the third eye. Even you may recognise that triangle symbol there with the eye in it. Some people say you can have an out-of-body experience, see the future because of this third eye. And the third eye is generally located sort of on your forehead there. The next video is really, really important. Please try and watch it, and watch this one first, because it explains why that is connected to our spirits. So look at this. The head is disproportionate. Remember I was talking about how symmetrically perfect the Egyptians and Anunnaki, etc., make their statues, but yet this head here is just disproportionate to its body, and that's probably because I think it was Anubis's head. Anubis was a jackal, and because it was pointing out over time, obviously it broke off. Look at just the weathering alone. So Anubis there, if you can see, makes much more sense in the instead of someone's face, because I think that was just recarved. And Anubis was obviously worshipped, but later on he became Osiris. Now, Anubis and Osiris, one of the same Anunnaki, live for thousands and thousands of years. So yes, over time their names change, their descriptions change, and their pictures and images change. But there's also talk that there's a Sphinx on Mars. Go and have a look, think for yourselves. It's interesting, but slaves, I'm doing this video on slaves of Egypt because people said that in one of my other videos, they're all slaves and that's how they moved these blocks. The Egyptians actually at this point weren't slaves. They were actually paid for workers, and that was found proof by Zahi Hawass. He was the head of antiquities in Egypt. He's no longer there now, but he did find proof that people were paid, and it said how much they were paid, etc. But I'm just trying to show you what how easy mainstream is to confuse you. Egypt tombs suggest pyramids not built by slaves, but look, tombs and pyramids, and if you've watched my other videos you know that the pyramid was not a tomb. There is tombs with bodies in, but this was not a tomb. No pyramids was a tomb. So I'm just showing you that that's from a place called Reuters, which you've probably heard of. Sorry, I have to make this one. This is for the armchair researchers that are telling me how my research is wrong. So I'm just going to explain why theirs is wrong. So first one is that they say that the blocks are moved onto the Nile and then to the pyramids, but the quarry is a lot nearer to the pyramids than the Nile is, so that point is pointless. Next one is they rolled it on sand with logs. Have you ever tried rolling a log on sand? Not going to happen. Pulling it on sand, you'll end up with a sand wall at the front. Millions of slaves, they said. Yes, millions. Do you know how much food that would have took for 20 years? Not going to happen. Not enough food around there. Floating the bricks up inside the pyramid and placing them that way. Clearly, they don't understand that the pyramids are solid. So you're not going to be able to float them up to the top, each one. The pyramid's not hollow. They poured the limestone and used it as concrete. No, because you still would have had to carry the same amount of weight to there. Go watch my other videos. Anubis, the Sphinx, or a lion? I'll let you decide. At the front of the Sphinx was this plate, and it was called a dream stele. Forgive me for pronouncing that wrong. And basically it shows two carved sphinxes with the face as the face there, because obviously this was way later than than when it was originally built. And if you've watched the other videos, you know that I'm saying that the face was changed. But so basically, there is no other record really of these two sphinxes. Now, there are reports that possibly there's one in Antarctica. There's possibly reports that there's another one still buried in the sand, or it's the one that's on Mars, and therefore its twin is on Mars. But also underneath is about the whole of records. Now, people have tried to find it, but let's be honest, the authorities would have already pulled it out and took absolutely everything if there was anything. Are you my mummy? The Egyptians had a thing for mummies, and they wanted to, communicate with the afterlife, or make sure that the people that died go through and are looked after. So you had Anubis, Osiris, and if you move away from Egypt, you had Hades and things like that. So the Anunnaki were well interested in talking to the dead as well. So you remember the Eye of Horus. Now, we'll get to the pineal gland a bit later on, and I'll explain a lot more about what it does and our consciousness, etc., or spirits. But I personally think that pyramids, or at least some pyramids around the world, were made to communicate. So when you're inside a pyramid, there was reports that they used to put people in there to be able to talk to the dead because of the frequencies of the earth plus the shape of the pyramid. So that's not much different from an Indian sweat lodge, where they can supposedly communicate with the deceased. An Egyptian lightsaber, or possibly a bulb. People seem to think that it's a bulb because it could be a filament inside, even though it does more look like a snake. And then there's a power wire, or a wire coming out of it into a box, which could be a power box. But have a quick look at these different sized characters. Do you remember I said the Anunnaki were 10 to 12 feet tall? So I think that one there holding it is a relation to the Anunnaki, and obviously the other one is a Homo sapien sapien. Now, if they have created these technical devices, they've obviously took them with them when they left the Anunnaki, or they disintegrated. Now have a look at this. This is a rock that actually grew around what looks like a bolt. So people were thinking that this is, again, going back to my panspermia thing, possibly predates, well, certainly predates the Anunnaki, but could be an alien race that was here before. And look at this. This is another item that was actually encased in. The council of aliens that I've mentioned before is made up of very different aliens that allow you as a soul or as a light spirit to join, before you're born. They're totally different from the Council of Nine. And the Council of Nine has Atum as one of the main deities. Now, these deities, through mediums and clairvoyants, have said that they've been with us since the start of time. Now, that time probably means the time from when humans were created, not from previous. Now, I'm talking here about Earth being seeded. Now, these guys wouldn't have done that. It was a race that we call the Ancients. Now, the reason why I believe that we was seeded is because there's these 3 billion year old objects that have been found around different places. Now, I think that they probably had DNA or bacteria or something to help start life on Earth. Now, there's people say, or eyewitnesses and whistleblowers, should I say, have said that other aliens have the same DNA as us. In fact, even Bigfoot does. So then you start thinking, well, okay, did they all make us? No. The ancients had this particular type of DNA. Now, we're calling it human DNA, but obviously it's not human DNA. Let's just call it ancient DNA. So the ancients went round seeding planets. And the reason why we can say that is because when we look at this, this is a little fruit fly, and it has human DNA. Now, if you imagine then that the whistleblowers that say all the other aliens have the same DNA as us, then it makes sense that one particular race that probably started life before anyone else went round seeding the planets. And if that's the case, then you've got a race of beings that's older than any life that existed on any other planet. Now, the source or creation, which is what the aliens call God, Now, whether or not it's sentient, I don't know. Whether or not it just manifests things. I'm on the side of manifesting things, but apparently the source or creation had told the ancients, which were the first race ever on the universe, to go and seed. So they were guided by the source or creation to create life throughout the universe. So when someone says, Bigfoot's DNA matches, it's got humans' DNA in it, therefore it's not real, think again, because even a little fly has. So the last video I was just talking about this woman here. So it's not worth carrying on. So the last video, because obviously if she's disregarded, so it's not worth carrying on. Whatever else she carries on and tries to lie about, disregarded is the facts, nonsense, and whatever else she carries on and tries to lie about. So let's go to another one. Is just here. So this video here, nonsense and lies. Colossal. So let's go to another one. So let's have a listen. So this video here, colossal cranium. So let's have a listen to what he says.
The ancient alien theories have been widely criticized and rejected. Scientific facts are found. Because
okay, so going widely rejected. Now, actually, it's widely rejected by people widely rejected don't want it. So in other words, it's Smithsonian, the Rockefellers, people, any institute that's funded by them. So in other words, the Smithsonian, the Rockefellers, and any institute now, as for funded by them, you see where I'm going with we've that. Got and now as for skulls, proof, and as we know, these skulls we've got are not boarded. These skulls, and as we know, these skulls headbound are not. These actually boarded, have different features to a human skull. Headboarded or headbound. So there's bit of a proof actually there. Have different features to a human skull.
Instead of looking at all the data and evidence
bit
and
of a proof there. Proof. Okay, let's look at the data and evidence.
Instead of looking at all the data and evidence and providing proof.
This is the evidence that they give us of the pyramids of Giza, like Egyptian pyramids came. This is the evidence that they give us. They were royal tombs. The pyramids of Giza, like Egyptian pyramids, came blah 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 before them. They were royal tombs. Bodies were found in any pyramids across the world, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds were found in any pyramids across the world, and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Not one body, pyramids. However, the tombs, believe it or not, that look like tombs, not one body. However, the tombs were look like tombs. So the sort of place that you find when they try and debunk it, they use this kind of crap here. So basically when says they try and debunk it, so straight away they're wrong. Here. So they're following. Basically says the wrong information. So straight away they're wrong. So they're following. And if you're just talking about wrong information in the first place alone. Here. Look at this. Even if you're just talking about Sky News finally admits that the Great Pyramid of Giza can collect and concentrate. Even Sky News finally admits that the Great Electromagnetic Energy can collect and concentrate. Now we've probably mentioned electromagnetic on my videos anyway, where the power. Now we've probably mentioned this before on my videos anyway, where the power. Some of these still have it. Bosnian Pyramid does. It comes from where it's obviously power pyramid. Some of these still have it. Bosnian Pyramid does. So if Sky News is talking about that, I know Sky, we can't trust Sky, but the fact that they've actually even allowed Sky News is talking about that. I know Sky, we can't trust Sky, but the fact that they've actually even allowed that the narrative information out there. Then you've got these characters here that just on about bunking, but the narrative.
Ancient alien enthusiasts.
I know I'm going on about the bunking, but
often from very old and very unreliable sources.
Well, no, actually, the old information is
very old and very unreliable sources.
Well, no, actually, the old
Ninshara, probably totally pronounced that wrong. She's the sister of Enlil and Enki. She's depicted with a cub, a lion cub. However, because of her size, I don't actually think it's a cub. I think it's actually probably a real full-size lion, because you remember they're a lot taller. Now, she goes by another name later on in life, a Nimna. But prior to that, she actually had relationships with her brother, Enki. And they bore a daughter to Enki, or she bore a daughter to Enki called Ninsa. And also she is actually quite important because she was the one that helped Enki, using her womb, to create Homo sapiens sapiens. So she's quite important in the whole history of humans, and so therefore our mitochondrial DNA actually comes from her. The Great Pyramid, built by Khufu, as we all know, because it says so here and everywhere. And if you believe this, please just go away, watch cat videos, don't watch my videos. For those of you that understand mainstream are wrong, carry on watching. So we know that it was marked down as Khufu's because there was a cartouche that was done above the king's chamber in the attic part of the Great Pyramid that was fake. We know that's fake. I've mentioned before, proved it's fake. It's been faked, and mainstream now know it's been faked. But they've dated the pyramid based on that cartouche, and obviously that's fake. So now they don't have a clue how old this is. But I just want to prove to you that mainstream haven't got a clue, because here it's saying now that mummies are actually 1,000 years earlier than previously believed. So that means the dating of these could be well wrong, which, as we know, are. Following on from the last 3 videos, you have to watch them in order. This is fascinating. So Murdoch is now hidden up, way up in the King's Chamber, even above that, which is where they found the fake graffiti, but that's another story. So he was crushing all these crystals, etc., and outside, eventually, Enki and Enlil agreed that they would let Murdoch live, but not give him any land and exile him. So they ended up having to get Ninurta to try and work out how to get into the Great Pyramid. So what they'd done was they cut up here, they cut a passageway, and then had to get another passageway, and finally got to Murdoch. They brought him out, and he was unconscious. They managed to revive him, and they said to him, "You've not got any land, but we're going to let you live." And he said, "No, I would rather die." And I'll tell you what happens in the next. Murdoch finally agreed that he could be banished and still live. However, that's not the end of Murdoch. He becomes Ra later on, but I'll cover that when we get there. So what happened next was Inanna wanted the pyramid that was created as a beacon to be destroyed. She said it reminds her of her loved one. So Ninurta went in his craft and shot the capstone off, because they couldn't actually shoot through the pyramid itself, so obviously their technology, without totally destroying it. So they shot the capstone off, and they collected the remaining unbroken crystals and set up another beacon somewhere else. Now they do describe what these locations, but obviously it's very difficult to know where they are because they're different names. God is real, according to possibly tablet 12 or 13 of the ancient texts, where he talks to the Anunnaki, Enlil, Enki, and Ninshag, the sister, and he said he was called Galzu, and he came over apparently from Nibiru and explained to the 3 of them that there's going to be a flood, and that they can't go back to Nibiru because of their age. Now they will die. Now he had white hair and was young looking, and the sister said she recognised him, and he went to school with her, but obviously she's now aged because she's on Earth. Anyway, cut to after the flood. You are going to love this. Anzu came down. Now obviously Galzu left. Anzu came down. He's the king, and I'll tell you, following on from my last video where I said God spoke to the Anunnaki. So after the flood, Anu came down from Nibiru. This was his last trip, and he spoke to the 3 siblings, Enki, Enlil, and Ninshag, and they thanked him for sending the emissary, Galzu. And he said, "What emissary?" And they said, "The one that came down and told us we can't go back to Nibiru because we will die because of the age, and the one that warned us about the flood." King Anu said, "I never sent anyone. I didn't know anything about this. We do know that you will age, but we didn't know anything about sending any emissary." So they all concluded that it was possibly, and this is their words, the creator of everything, trying to warn them and to let them keep humans alive, which is very interesting. The Sphinx is a lot older than you think, but not as old as some researchers say. Now, some researchers say this is
prior to the flood, which would have been 10,000 years plus ago. And they say this is also older than the pyramids. But the problem with some of these researchers is they forget that the pyramids had a covering over it. So any weathering would have took that off first and then started to the weathering work on the inner stones, whereas the Sphinx didn't have an outer covering, so the weathering attacked that first, so that's why it looks older. But anyway, so no, it was built after the floods. The ancient texts say that, which makes sense if you read the ancient texts. Now, the Great Flood was actually caused by Nibiru coming round, breaking off an ice shelf, causing tsunami. Now, Nibiru's been round twice more since, so I'm saying that there could have been a second mini flood, bearing in mind the Nile's not too far from it, which could have caused the weathering that they believe is old. 600 videos, thank you very much for everyone. Okay, so we're going to find out where this Abydos carvings come into play. Now, people say that these are from someone that went into the future and saw our helicopters, but let's be honest, they would have had to have come pretty much in the last 100 years, because in another 20 or 30 years we won't have helicopters. So that's pretty precise for us to know that, but they didn't, because we can tell exactly what this is from ancient texts. Now, we have to believe the ancient texts because they were found in 1800s, and they have a fully fledged language, which linguistics agree that was the first language, and then we had Babylonian and Aramaic, etc., that followed on from that. So this was the first language. So we have to agree that these ancient texts are real and tell us everything that we need to know. Now, if you go to the ancient texts, the one particular passage says Enki and Enlil descended in helicopters, and the actual abbreviation or the actual translation is whirlwinds. Now, the helicopters are described in the ancient texts as having a sort of a propeller type thing, and it's a single-seater craft. So we can now safely say that that is an Anunnaki. Now, that makes sense because the Anunnaki were around and flying around, and we know all that because of the ancient texts during the time of the Egyptians. In fact, Marduk became Ra, so we know all of this. So that now rules out the time travel. It's basically someone's carved, whether they had permission or not, but someone carved one of the flying devices. Now, we've got these other craft here. Now, this may not be all the craft that the Anunnaki had, but these are the crafts that we can see here. So let's have a look at what crafts these. So remember this one here. Let's have a look. Now, there it is, and this is a recreation of it by Giorgio, and they're putting it in a wind tunnel at the moment to test the aerodynamics of it, and actually surprisingly it works. So we can now rule that one out. Let's look what else the Anunnaki had. They had these single-seater rocket little powered ships, and let's have a look what else they had. They also had this type of device, flying device. So we can now say with some degree of certainty that the Abydos carvings are just recreations of what whoever saw the Anunnaki flying around in. Watch the next video and I'll explain what Atlantis is and where they came from, etc., etc. Yes, it has snowed in Egypt. Now, coming up in my videos, I'm going to be telling you our true history of Egypt, not the stuff you get taught in universities and on TV and stuff like that. And the reason why I say that they're wrong is because, let's just look at this. Pretty much a month doesn't go by without them admitting that their dates are all wrong. So look here, they're talking now about, and this is recent, they're talking about mummies are now actually 1,000 years older than what they believed, which pushes everything back. The dates then push Cleopatra back, etc. So way off. 1,000 years is a humongous amount of time. So if they've got that wrong, then don't listen to mainstream's dates. You've got more chance of me telling you the correct dates by watching and following my videos. Now, here's Mesopotamia, here's Egypt. See, there's a gap there. That's how the Mesopotamians moved into Egypt. And I'm just going to show you one more thing, that this cartouche, which was in the Great Pyramid, has been proven to be fake. So we know the dates are. Are you going to join with me as we learn the true history of Egypt? Not what you're told on schools or in TV. We're going to go in dig deep like I have with the Sumerian and with the Anunnaki. So we need to first go through who the people are, so you get an idea of who the people are, that when I get round to talking about them, you'll know who they are and where they were in time, etc. So the first most important thing is to know that a cartouche, which is what you're looking at there, an oval with a line at the bottom there, represents royalty. Now that's really important because obviously the people that we're going to be talking about are either pharaohs or kings or gods. So the first person that we need to talk about in the lineup is Ra. So he was Marduk. His real name's Marduk, and he was an Anunnaki, but he changed his name to Ra and took over Egypt. And he has a son, or represented for the sun god. So he was actually a sun god. Very, very. This is where I make a professor of ancient Egypt either look silly or a misinformation person. Okay, this was a TV series called The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egyptians. I watched it a few years back when it was on TV, and I thought, oh my god, they got so many things wrong, this can't be right. So let's have a look and dissect.
Good luck! Shukran kazeelan.
The Great Pyramid of Giza, final resting place of King Khufu.
Okay, wrong. There was no body found there, so she can't be 100% say that that's correct. Also, no bodies were found in any pyramids because no pyramid was a tomb. Tombs are tombs, pyramids are pyramids. So I did some research and I thought, let's see who she was, and that's her there. So then I went and looked at where she was, University of College of London. It turns out, those of you that know my videos, if you don't, go back and watch from video 1 onwards, but the Rockefellers play a big part in misinformation. This is the granite box inside the King's Chamber, inside the Great Pyramid. Now, I'm just following on from the last video where the woman was saying that the last resting place of Khufu. Now, if this was Khufu's last resting place, it would have had, as a sarcophagus or a box, it would have been ornate. It would have had the most wonderful carvings on it. All of them have something on them except for this one, and that's because there was no lid. And why is there no lid? Because it wasn't a sarcophagus, it wasn't a resting place, it was used for something else, which I've mentioned in my previous videos. So this is actually a tomb. Have a look. Compared to what we just saw a second ago, which was an empty room. Look, these are all different tombs, and they're all adorned with drawings, carvings, all sorts of stuff. Compared to that, so I think we can safely say. Let's meet Thoth. He was an Egyptian deity. Now, he was actually an Anunnaki, and we can tell that from the emerald tablets that he wrote, where he talks about standing amongst the little humans. Now, we know that the Anunnaki are between 8 to 12 foot tall, so that would make sense that he was an Anunnaki. Plus, he lived a lot longer. He also said he lived a lot longer than these humans. Now, Thoth was quite important because he was very interested in the afterlife, and so when I go through these videos, I'll be talking about him and what he could see, what he wrote down about the afterlife. You'll notice that a lot of these Egyptians have got head masks, and this is because if you watch my other videos, you'll see that the Anunnaki gave an eagle mask for a job well done, and they also gave wings for their feet. So this is just a continuation on from the ancient older times with giving away. Okay, I'm going to show you this carving here, and I'll let a professor who worked for a place where the Rockefellers funded, but regardless of that, and then I'll tell you my version of what I think this is compared to her version.
We know that in the very earliest times, their gods resembled familiar things, the world around them, elements of nature, and certainly animals. And over time, the animals, their forms, their shapes, their characteristics were distilled down into this sort of divine figure.
Their characteristics distilled down into this divine. She has not a clue. Okay, so because the problem is she's only learnt, unfortunately badly, from universities, etc., ancient history of Egypt, whereas I have learnt a lot more from all over, and having a wider picture explains a lot more than just her talking about Egypt. So I'll explain why. So she's saying that this basically divine, we waffle what she's just said, as you agree, I'm hoping. So look here, so this is connected to the head. Now the head is really important. in Mesopotamia and Sumer as well. So this, if you watch my other videos, would be a ram, and that would be the constellation of this deity, not what she said, which was a load of rubbish. Now I can prove that because Marduk, who was Ra in Egypt, has this sacred bull, which his star sign, as written in the ancient tablets, is a bull, and this would be the sun disc that's on the top of his head, because Marduk, Ra was the sun god, and just to show you the depiction there of the sun on top of the head. So as you see, if you go back and not just follow one train of thought, if you do what I do and research everything, it makes so much more sense than what she just, I don't even know what she was on about. So there you go. This is why you should be watching me and subscribing. Thanks. This is where I make this Professor Dr. Joan Fletcher look a bit silly again. Now listen to what she says in her program about ancient Egypt, these carvings.
Some experts even believe these symbols can be vocalized. By turning the simple drawings into sounds, makes this the world's earliest known writing.
Okay, this is... She went to university, really, and she didn't even know about the Sumerian language, which actually came first. Now, this comment here is in Forbes, and they're saying that there may have been a vocal language in Africa, but of course no one's got any proof of that, because you can't, no one had tape recorders. So basically, then they're saying, well, we're not sure if it's Egyptian or Sumerian, but if you read the Sumerian tablets, which are older, and actually talk about how Egypt was built and stuff before Egypt. Let's meet the Egyptian god Nun. Now, Nun was supposedly the creator of everything, but obviously we know he's not, so we break that down. He was the person that actually gave life to Egypt. Now, his name represents primeval waters. Now, he was the father of Ra. Now, we all know Ra as Marduk from Mesopotamia, or Anunnaki. Now, who's Marduk's father? Enki. And what is Enki god of? Water. So both of these are the same person. Primeval waters, Enki god of water. Now, my opinion is, because he's the god of water, this here, the Nile, I think up from Aswan up to probably Giza, is man-made. And when I say man-made, made by the Anunnaki. Now, there are some scientists out there that actually do think that some of these, some of this is actually man-made. And the ancient texts for the Sumeria actually talk about them creating rivers, so it kind of makes dynasties in Egypt. Now, technically there's 32, but most people really only talk about 30, because one was short-lived and one possibly was a continuation of another one. Now, a dynasty is where a family will rule for a long period of time, either until they have no more heirs or they're overthrown. So some dynasties can last up to 200 years before they end up being changed to a different one. Osiris, I'll get to his underworld goings on a bit later on and who he was, but it's quite important to find out who his sister was. It was Isis, and she was also his wife. Yeah, and they had a son called Horus. Now, as we see here with the Anunnakis, there's a lot of inbreeding going on, just as they did in Greek times as well. So they kept the bloodline as pure as possible. Homosexuality in the ancient times, either with the Anunnaki or Egyptians or Greeks. So I thought I'd better just touch on it. Now, we are aware, if you watch my last videos, that Osiris married his sister and had a kid, Horus. Now, if we look here, Osiris's brother, Set, actually also had a relationship with Horus, supposedly. And obviously he's a male and he's a male. So when we look at the ancient history on how they literally inbreeding was not a problem for them, then I doubt if they would see homosexuality as a problem if they're marrying sisters and uncles are doing things with nephews. So I don't think there would have been a problem with them back then. Elongated skulls in Egypt, there was a lot of them, not just from pharaohs but from priests as well. And this is important because not all of these pharaohs and priests were descendants of the Anunnaki. some of them were not. So then we look back at ancient Sumerian times when Enki would choose a king or a priest for rulership by manipulating the DNA before the ruler was born. Now that sounds far-fetched, but now we can actually choose the sex. So imagine if we go one step further and not just choose the sex, but choose various other attributes. Now, just look at this dinosaur here with feathers for a moment. And now a while back, dinosaurs actually managed to find the DNA strand change, listen to this, scales into feathers. So if they can do that, what could the Anunnaki have done? We need to know why the Egyptians married in family and had children that was then rulers. And that stems back from the Sumerian, which we know are the Anunnaki, which really, that's just a team name that was given for those ones that came to Earth, the Elohim. So the Elohim, the way they portray their lineage is if you marry someone, you can have a child with them. And if you was already successor, due to be successor, then your child would be successor. But if your brother, for example, married his half stepsister and had a child, then that child would then take precedence over the other one. So it's a very complicated system, but that's what they had, and that's why there was a lot of inbreeding to try and deliberately keep their lineage going from their side, even though they may be brothers. And there was a lot of fighting. This is the professor from that TV show about ancient Egypt. Now, she's only studied ancient Egypt, as far as I'm aware. So let's have a look at something that she said.
And is dressed in all the same paraphernalia as every king who succeeds him. He has the tie-on false beard to emphasise his virility and his strength.
Okay, so that's all she said about that. But if you learn a little bit more than just ancient Egypt, you'll realise that the Anunnaki, who were in control of Egypt, have these beards. Now, these beards are definitely a status symbol. And the reason that I can definitely say that, not just a status symbol, but for other reasons that we don't actually know. But, for example, Cain and Abel, when Cain killed Abel, he was banished. But as he was banished, the Enki, god Enki, manipulated his DNA so he would not grow a beard. So he was banished beardless. This is the sun god Ra from the TV series SG-1. My opinion, just from the ancient text, he's not the same sort of colour, skin. He would have been pale with blonde hair and would have been 8 to 12 foot tall. Don't hate me if you've got an issue with the colour skin. I get a lot of people saying Anunnakis were black, and whenever I ask for any kind of written evidence, not off of the internet, but proper texts, ancient texts, no one can ever get back to me. But speaking of discrepancies, I said in a previous video that Set had a relationship with Horus. Now, technically, that's kind of true, and that's because certain translations down the line, and we're not talking modern translation, we're talking Egyptian translations, kind of got the bits wrong. Now, it's quite interesting the fact that Set did actually. You got to listen to the next video. Honestly, it's quite freaky. The ancient Egyptians actually got their own translations wrong down the line. Now, if you look here, you'll see that Ra, which we know was Marduk, in this description here, that he had a couple of kids, and then he had a couple more. They had a couple more kids, and then we get to Set, Osiris, etc. Whereas other translations say that Cyrus and these ones down here were the direct descendants of Ra. So they're kind of all, we're close enough to kind of figure out which one's which. Now, the story goes, the most important story here is to do with Osiris and Set. Now, because they were more than likely the direct descendants of Ra, they were given half of Egypt each. And Set didn't like that. He wanted to take the whole of Egypt over. And that's where the marrying of the brother, sort of half-sisters, etc. So over the many hundreds of years, Set wanted to take out his brother Osiris to rule the whole of Egypt. And eventually he came up with an idea one day, after many sort of skirmishes between the two, that he would have invite all the gods over to his place and he created this chest, massive box, and he got the height of Osiris spot on, and he made the box spot on height of Osiris. Now, when all the gods came and they're all having a good laugh and a joke, at the end of the meal, Set brings out this box and says, whoever matches the height of this box wins the prize or whatever it was that they was trying to pretend that there was. So everyone went into this box, and then the very last person was Osiris, and lo and behold, he was the exact same size as the box. Set's people then locked the box up and follow the next video. Osiris was trapped in the box alive, and Set's henchmen took the box to the ocean and threw it in. Now, Osiris, at this point in time, was married to Isis, which was his sister. And the reason why he married his sister is because if they had a kid, that kid would then be succession to the throne and possibly rule the whole of Egypt instead of it being split into half. Now, what Set didn't know is Isis, the wife, stroke sister, went looking for the box and found it and then took it back. Now, there's a whole new story, so keep watching. It gets even more scary. But you can always tell Osiris because look at his hat. Yeah, it kind of reminds you of someone's hat. And trust me, the Vatican knows a lot more than they let on. They don't have two telescopes. One of them's called Lucifer to look for God. They look up into space for a different reason. I thought I'd just touch on skin colour in ancient Egypt. Now, in my last video I said that I think Ra was suntanned, and that's a logical conclusion, seeing as he was there, at least in the Middle East area, for hundreds of thousands of years. Now, that's a hot area. It's not like England, for example. Now, also here we see that he doesn't have a wife or the mother of these children. So one could have been an Anunnaki, which explains why it's Pau, because the Anunnaki original description is Pau. And obviously he was an Anunnaki, he was Marduk. So he could have also had relationships with a human, which would have possibly gave a brown child. Now, just to show you how much someone can get suntanned, now this is, you know, you got to remember hundreds of thousands of years, whereas this person here has probably not done hundreds of thousands of years. Well, this one actually does look like they've done hundreds of thousands of years, but that's why I think he had a white child. And Osiris was locked in the box and thrown into the ocean. Osiris found the box, pulled it out, and unfortunately he was already dead. However, Seth found out that Isis now had the sort of coffin, shall we say, and he came and snatched that and chopped up Osiris's body into 14 parts and spread them around Egypt. And Isis then went looking for those parts and actually found those parts, all but one. You can probably guess which part of the man's anatomy she couldn't find. However, this is a long story, she then found that she could still get his essence, and if you know what I'm on about, a man's essence that will be able to produce children. So she artificially inseminated herself to give herself a baby so that the baby would be the heir of Egypt. I'll follow for more. What has the rock got to do with ancient Egypt or the Anunnaki? I'll tell you shortly. So Isis, who was the wife stroke sister of Osiris, who got chopped up by Set, she found most of the pieces except for, shall we say, the pea shooter part. She actually found enough to be able to artificially inseminate herself, and she had a child called Horus. Now, of course, this is all to do with bloodlines and who will rule Egypt after they die. So Seth would have killed Horus, her newborn son. Now, bearing in mind this was a miracle birth, so keep that in mind when we get to Jesus. But he grew up being taught by Osiris's fans in martial arts, but it wasn't really martial arts. It was more wrestling, because as we know, the Anunnaki did the wrestling. And thus we get back to the rock and the rest. Horus's mother, Isis, hid Horus for the longest time and was getting him trained by women, yes, and men of the Osiris's clan, who obviously we know Osiris got killed by Set. So Horus was trained in martial arts, but if you watch my last video, you know it's not technically not the martial arts that we know and love. Now, eventually, Horus was of an age and a skill that he could now say to the Anunnaki gods, I am the rightful heir. Now, at this point, Seth was in charge because he'd murdered Osiris, but Horus actually, in terms of bloodline, was due to be the heir. Now, this obviously caused a lot of problems, and the Anunnaki gods let them carry on as they were for the time being. However, you've got to watch the next video. I'm running out of time. Some really disgusting stuff happened next. You may remember in a previous video I said that Horus and Set may have had a homosexual relationship. Technically, it might not be true. And the reason for that is because there's so many different versions, but one version is that after Horus came out and said that he should be rightful heir to Egypt, and the Anunnaki sort of said, well, you know, sort it out yourselves. Horus and Isis, which was actually Set's mother, decided to have a banquet type thing and invite Set. Now, Set came along, and Set, at this point, decided to throw his seed, if you know what I'm on about, it's a seed that could produce babies, at Horus, in order that if it went on Horus, then he would be underneath Set in terms of, in terms of who would be the rightful heir. But guess what happened next? Set had tried to throw his man seed over Horus. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and Horus caught it, which means he wasn't underneath Set in terms of lineage now, because Set's manly seeds didn't quite work. However, Isis, who was actually Set's sister, Isis had put Horus's seed in the salad that was at the banquet that Set was eating. So that means Set now had inside him the seed of Horus, and that's where we get the homosexuality possibly coming into it, where it's not really the way we thought it was, in the way I say that these ancient texts in Egypt, you got to read between the lines sometimes. So that now means Horus was rightful heir. When Set found out that he'd eaten the seed of Horus, which must have been a horrible thought, he got angry, and they both had a fight in the sky. Not with wings like that, but the actual description, wait for it, was of a craft that was described just like this, and it had little wings as well coming out. So this would have been one of the craft that was used. Now, the description also said it had two eyes at the front that was firing out a light, which we can assume would be a laser beam of some description. So as the two of them fought in the air, Horus managed to hit Set's ship, and which caused him to lose a man tennis ball, if you want to be polite about it, which then now stopped him from having children himself, Set, anymore. Set was defeated in battle by Horus. Now, what happened next, there's a couple of different versions. One is that Horus took Set to Ra, which was Marduk, all chained up and everything, and said to Ra, what can I do with him? And Ra said, you can actually do whatever you want with him. So Horus was about to kill Set when Isis, which is Set's sister, but Horus's mother, came and freed Set, and Set ran off. And Horus was apparently so angry that he chopped his mother's head off, which is one version of the story. The other version is that Horus, when he lost the battle, moved away to a faraway land with his wife and kids that he already had, and couldn't produce any more, and then Horus took over the whole of Egypt. There's a pyramid that not many people know of in Abu Rawash, which is about 5 miles north of Giza. And this is it here. Now, what's fascinating is it's actually on a very, very steep hill before they started to build the pyramid itself, which is, impressive to take blocks up to that height.
Now, the mainstream say that it belongs to the son of Khufu. Now, anyone that's watched my videos know that I totally reject the idea that Khufu had the Great Pyramid, and therefore any pyramids relating to his son would be probably out of date. So I don't think that's the case. I think mainstream's just trying to make it fit. Now, what's interesting is this pyramid goes deep into the actual hill that it's standing on, which is quite interesting. But if mainstream say that it was never finished, which is why it looks a bit raggedy, but what if an explosion actually happened and it's took it all off, which is why there's rubble all around? Anunnaki, aliens, or humans built the Great Pyramid? I'll let you decide. So this is an aerial shot of the pyramid. Shows it's got 8 sides. You can only see this from above, and it's during the equinox. So they're pretty clever, whoever did that. Now, it's also aligned perfectly to the 4 cardinal points, which is north, east, south, and west, which is pretty impressive considering they weren't looking at a whole map from above. Now, this is a shot showing just some of the ley lines around the world with all the monuments based on them. We know a ley line is a power grid, and as you see here, as soon as it intersects with a particular another ley line, that's exactly where these special monuments all around the world are. And this is a fake cartouche that was now proven to be fake to show that it was Khufu's. Now we know it's not Khufu's. It means it's a lot older than the dates that were given. Now, also, there is no proof. People say, oh, there's tens of thousands, 100,000, millions of people work to build it. There's no evidence at all of any amount of settlements near here at all. This is an Egyptian Stonehenge. No, it's not. It's actually the UK Stonehenge. But the Independent and Times newspaper write this: mystery of the Stonehenge solved as ancient Egyptians used it for solar calendars, expert claims. Now, anyone that's watched my videos know that I've already said this, and this was dated a couple of days ago. It's the 12th today. I've already done videos on it, and I've been saying this since the 80s. So this expert, whoever's just figured this out, needs to come talk to me. So the reason, they don't even know why the Egyptian calendar, but I'll explain why. So even though I've already done this in other videos, so Enlil's time was coming to an end in the constellation, his constellation, and it was going to change over to Marduk/Ra, Egyptian sun god Ra, which was one of the same people, Marduk. And Enlil didn't want that, and he wanted to prove to the people that Ra was telling that it's going to be Ra's time. So Enlil got Ninurta, his son, to go around and build Stonehenges, which was calendars, so that the Egyptians and everyone else around the world would know it's still Enlil's time. However, Enlil was actually wrong. It was coming up to Marduk's point, but that's beside the point. Now, I cover this in a previous video where I actually prove that this was connected to the Book of Enki. If you don't know what I'm on about, Book of Enoch. If you don't know what I'm on about, please go and watch my previous videos, preferably in order because they make so much more sense. Thank you. And yes, you feel free to call me an expert. This may interest you if you don't already know. So this is the temple of Seti in Abydos in Egypt. Now, what makes that special? Well, it's actually got what they call a king's list on there. Now, this is all the kings that were pharaohs over the dynasties, but there may be 1 or 2 missing. We don't know because obviously we're only going by what's actually been put down here. And this is actually what it looks like as a real wall with the actual hieroglyphs on. Now, that king's list, you can actually go and look and break down. You've watched my other videos. If not, please go back and watch how I show you what a cartouche is and what makes it a cartouche. So you can then break down with the king's list who was there and what period, because it's in order. So quite important that, because that then leads up to who did what later on in Egypt. I thought I'd mention a few things you may not know about the Great Pyramid. So Dr. Zahi was the head of antiquities in Egypt for the longest time, and he called the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid the so-called King's Chamber, and that's because he knew no bodies were ever buried there, and he knew it wasn't a tomb, because tombs are tombs, not a pyramid is not a tomb. So this is what the King's Chamber is. It's up there, and there's a Queen's Chamber there. However, that's just the name that people gave. Now, inside the King's Chamber is this granite box. Now, this granite box is 2.5 by 1.5 cubits, which just so happens to be the same size as the Ark of the Covenant. Now, also be wary of people showing lids. There was never a lid shown to the box at all.
No writing was ever found in the Great Pyramid, and funny enough, the pyramid was built to have a light coming up from it, and Las Vegas has a hotel that is shaped in a pyramid with a light coming up. Coincidence? Did you know the real Indiana Jones, Dr. Zahi Hawass, who was the head of antiquities in Egypt, was caught up in a couple of scandals, which is why they sort of forced him to retire. And allegedly, he was possibly selling antiquities that he shouldn't be selling, making a profit. And he's also was caught up in a scandal where 3 Germans were trying to take some paint off of the cartouche in the Great Pyramid to find out whether it was fake or not, and subsequently down the line we did find out that it was fake. But I don't think Zahi was involved in that part of it, because I think he would rather it be Khufu's pyramid, so that way it stops all people thinking that it was built by aliens. Now, the problem was back in 2010 when Zahi was removed, the tourism in Egypt went right down, so they was trying to find ways of bringing him back. I had someone say on a previous video that the emerald tablets of Thoth are in a museum. So these are the unbreakable, physics-defying, the hardest rock known to man on this planet are sitting in a museum. And I kind of replied saying, well, if you think that, I've got some fresh air I can tell you. Military would not allow... Okay, if you don't know why the military would be interested in these and just letting them sit in a museum, then my videos are probably not for you. But they also say that there's more than 10 tablets, because I said 10. There's translations work out more than 10, but originally there was 10. So now Thoth himself supposedly in the book come from Atlantis. Now I'll cover that because I'm running out of time in the next video. One of the translations of the Emerald Tablets of Thoth is that Thoth will come from Atlantis. Now, if you watch my previous videos, you know that there's a bit of a discrepancy there. So anyway, let's go along with the lines that he was from Atlantis. Now, he was Thoth in Egypt, but he wasn't Thoth in Atlantis. He would have been Ningazida, which would have been Marduk's brother from the Anunnaki side. Now, that's fine because that makes sense. Now, he states that the island he was on was a circular one, which is fine because I already suggested that it was an Anunnaki settlement because the Anunnaki built their cities in circles. So he was warned off. Now it says it in the actual Emerald Tablets that he needs to leave his island before it gets sunk, and it was sunk because the Anunnaki used their weapons of terror and destroyed it. So he then went to Egypt and became... You may have seen this video of the guy flying over the top of the Great Pyramid. Now, they slow it down and freeze frame it almost. I'm going to try and do that now. And there. So basically, there appears to be some writing on these blocks. Now, that could be one of a couple of reasons, but the actual writing here on this particular one looks Roman. It has that Roman style font. Now, we do know that Romans did actually indeed visit Egypt. Now, I'm not saying the Romans were there when these were built, but, you know, people can climb up to the top of them. That's not impossible. Of course, nowadays it's not allowed. Now, this one up here has got what appears to be some sort of hieroglyphics, which makes it really interesting. But it's also, if you look back here, there's blocks deliberately put in the center there. So that would have been where the light beam would have come out. You can see there's a hole there. The Great Pyramid had a light beam going up into space. And this is from the Lost Book of Enki, which is translated from ancient text that Zachariah Sitchin had found in a library that you probably now won't be allowed to go and read them. They've probably even destroyed them, knowing what the secret military are like. Now, the capstone was classed as having electrum, which is naturally forming alloy from gold or silver, and silver, and Gibble. Now, Gibble, unfortunately, only translates into a person or a deity or a god. So I think we are misunderstanding what Gibble is. My take on it would be, because the god was fire, so if you put fire and sand, you end up with glass. So here we see a hole, which is at the top of the Great Pyramid. So inside the Great Pyramid had crystals, which used the ley lines to help produce a beam that would... Aliens were involved in the Great Pyramid, and with the light beam going straight up into space. I did mention this on video 1 onwards, so do scroll back or go to my website, outtruehistory.co.uk, and watch the videos onwards. But I'll just give you a hint. It was to do with a beacon so that when the Anunnaki returned again, they would know where to go, because last time the flooded their landing pad, so they had to make a new one, and this was a beacon. Now we can kind of prove that where this is a really crude drawing of the pyramid. They got the tunnels here, etc., and there's the king's chamber here and the queen's chamber. Now the images always show these shafts going up off of the king's chamber and the queen's chamber. Now everyone says it goes off to Orion. However, there is no gap here on the edge. So it actually goes up at an angle. And now this is proved by the History Channel when they sent a little robot up there. It goes off up to the top for the beam of light. Here's something you might find interesting about the second largest pyramid, the Khafre's pyramid. Now, technically it's not his because he wasn't even born when the pyramids were built, and neither was Khufu. But mainstream will push that down your throat. Now, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth talk about Thoth, which was in Ningazida, as an Anunnaki building the pyramid and putting a spaceship underneath it. However, everyone seems to think it was a Great Pyramid. He's referring to Khafre's pyramid. Now, he did build the first pyramid, and that was in the Lost Book of Enki. But let's talk about the second pyramid here. This is the one that no one talks about, really. Now, if you read the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, you will realise what actually Thoth stroke Ningazida is talking about. He wants to communicate with the dead, or spirits, shall we say, the light energy beings. I'm actually running out of time here, so I'm going to carry this on the next video. Do follow and watch. I hope this video is going to blow your mind. Seances were done at night because spirits or light energy beings struggled with the neutrinos or photons that come from the sun. That's why some seances are done with a red light, because the red light that produces a different frequency to a white light. Now, if you move that information over to Khafre's pyramid, which is the second largest pyramid in Giza, yes, they say that that was his burial chamber. No, it wasn't. It was actually a place where he would lay down and have less neutrinos coming through the pyramid to be able to talk in pitch black to spirits. And so that's what the Khafre's pyramid was for. Now, there is, if you look here, this is in Smithsonian. I know, do say be careful what the Smithsonian say, but looking for neutrinos, nature's ghost particles, because that's the same frequency as I just said. Now, there's a massive place deep, deep underground that they've built to actually stop neutrinos getting through. It's partly to do with heavy water. I'll carry on in the next video. We know this is a Great Pyramid, and this was built by Ningazida, which was also known as Thoth in Egyptian times. Regardless of what people say, that's my opinion. And this one is also built by the same person, but a bit later on. Now, this was actually written in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, where he talks about building a pyramid. Now, unfortunately, everyone assumes it was that one, but it wasn't. It was this one that came later on. So let me read a passage to you from the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, because if you watch my last video, you'll see that he used this to get to the halls of Amenti, which was basically the underworld, the spirit world, which is what I just said in the previous video. So ready? Raised I high over the entrance, a doorway, a gateway leading down to Amenti. Few there would be dare with the courage. Few past the portal to the dark Amenti. Raised over the passage, I, a mighty pyramid. So basically, where that pyramid is, he's built, he believed that there was a gateway underneath that to the spirit world. And then he wrote, using the power that overcomes Earth's force. So in other words, he's placed it in a certain place deliberately, such as a ley line. Deep and yet deeper I place I a force, house or chamber. From it I carved a circular passage reaching almost to the great summit. There in the apex set I the crystal. So in other words, he's put a crystal somewhere up the top here. Of course, no one shows you the top, but that's what he's saying here. So it would be interesting if someone actually scanned that properly. Sending the ray into the time-space, drawing the force out from the ether, concentrating upon the gateway to Amenti. So basically, as I said in the previous video, he laid in the chamber and use the crystal up the top here to be able to talk or feel like he's out of body experience to the underworld, to the spirit world. Some new information on this tiny little alien skeleton, and I say alien skeleton because if you look at it and you actually study it, this was found in Chile, in the desert in Chile. It has 10 pairs of ribs, 2 fewer than humans, and so on. There's a whole long list of things. Even the cranial plate there is different from humans, and the jawbone, and so on, so on, so on. So this little creature, in my opinion, is what people would call a Smurf, yes, it's the real name, or a leprechaun, or there's so many different names across different locations. Now, what's interestingly new is in Egypt recently they found 2 mummified versions of that skeleton, both girls again, just like the other one, and they were found in Tutankhamun's tomb, and they say that it's Tutankhamun's daughters, but they've never seen anything like it, other than, wait for it, look at that, position, shape, exactly the same. Unfortunately, this person believes that this was debunked in 2013. They haven't obviously done their homework. Feel free to watch my videos and learn a little bit more, or go to ourtruehistory.co.uk and learn even more. Now, this little alien I've done videos on, and it's only got 10 ribs instead of 12, and the cranial plate's different to humans, and jaw's different, and basic eye socket's different, the whole long list. So let's have a look what they say about it. So it says here, DNA not only shows that she was human, but she belonged to the local population. So human DNA. Now, a banana has human DNA. A fruit fly has human DNA. Basically, everything has human DNA. In fact, it's not human DNA. It's just us being big-headed. It's a generic DNA. Anyway, but let's go along. And she belonged to the local population of Chile. So that means chances are she's not going to cross the ocean to go somewhere else, is she? Little tiny little thing like that, bless. Well, actually, in Egypt, they found 2 mummified versions of the same skeleton, both again female, and they have come up with this concocted story that they believe it was Tutankhamun, who was a kid himself, that they're his children, and they were fetuses, and even though they don't look like anything like a human, etc., etc., and that's why they were mummified. So that you can see mainstream here clutching at straws. But let's have a look at why the original. So now these have got to be fake as well if they're not, if people think they're fake. But let's have a look at who actually debunked it. So this was a guy called Gary Nolan, and he worked for the Stanford University in California. Let's have a look at Gary. There he is. He's an upstanding fellow, so I'm sure he wouldn't. He would tell us the truth, wouldn't he? Because well, who's funding the place that he worked at? Let's have a look. So Stanford University. Oh, got some funding. Wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. From oh, what's that at the top? Rockefeller Foundation. Weren't they the ones that pay for money for the Cairo Museum, the Smithsonian, other institutions? And they basically, it appears when you look deep into it, they don't want us to know our true history. Because you'll find out that the Smithsonian actually destroyed giant skeletons, and that's why people say, oh, there's no such thing as giant skeletons. They actually destroyed them and had a court case over it. So when you put all of this together, it is not debunked, because clearly they're actually saying that it was a real skeleton just because it's got DNA in it that matches fruit flies. Ignore the word human there. So what do you think? You think, once again, ourtruehistory.co.uk has boom dropped the mic? Thank you. I hope you're enjoying this video so far. I have actually put the remaining videos of this category that you're watching on my Patreon page. I'm sorry to do that, but again, they are free already on YouTube. You just have to watch them in order to find the ones you want. But whatever it is that you're watching at the moment, the remaining, well, the whole video is on my Patreon page, so feel free to go there and watch the remaining, however long, it could be another hour's worth of footage, videos, etc. So I'm just trying to do it because having a website costs, and I have to pay every month for the server space. So I thought I'd do, so I hope you know where I'm going with this. So hopefully you like it. If you do, go over to my Patreon page and watch loads more videos, loads more content, as well as the remaining however long, and it's it's going to be long. I wouldn't do it for just 1 minute. So there's loads more to watch on my Patreon page. Anyway, thank you so much for watching these videos. And as I say, they're all free on YouTube, but you just kind of need to watch them in an order if you do want to watch them in a category. Thanks. Bye.